Hello, my dear friends and parishioners. This is Father Mark, and we're on day 39 of the Bible in a Year, looking at Exodus 21 and Leviticus 14. Last time we talked about Exodus. I'd like to kind of focus a little bit on Leviticus chapter 13 and 14 a little bit, because we did talk about it last time. But in both Exodus and Leviticus, these days we're going through whole sections that talk about laws. Also in Exodus, God is speaking on Mount Sinai and giving a series of laws, and in chapter 21 of Exodus, some of them are very beautiful, laws of restraint, saying it can't be an eye for an eye or revenge, but you have to have a certain, control. I mean, it should be just an eye for an eye. I mean, you don't do more than what, you don't kill someone if they've only done a slight offense against you. And then there are laws about other kinds of violence and harm and how you need to show restraint. And those are nice sorts of laws. And also those laws about slaves, that they should not be treated in a harsh way or abusive way, as was usually the case in other ancient Near Eastern cultures. But the Israelites and the Jewish law, God's law, had some restraint on that, and that's a beautiful thing. But some people, would question, and nowadays slavery is kind of really sensitive topic in our world politics, and Father Michael Schmitz, maybe some people who are maybe listening to Father Michael and aren't Catholic or not Christian or not even believer, they kind of would say, well, this priest is telling us that it's okay, that in the Bible, God is allowing slavery. And as Father Michael says, it's he says a number of things, and so but some people would question and be cynical and skeptical and say, well, this priest, Father Michael, is telling us that it's okay that God permitted slavery to continue, or it's okay in Leviticus that God, had different rules for women. For example, with the purification after menstruation or after childbirth, they couldn't come into the temple until a little bit later, and those things, and that Father Michael is trying to say that it's that the word unclean doesn't mean something bad, and yeah, we do have to think and reflect on these things, and Father Michael is trying to explain, and we're all trying to explain the Old Testament parts of the Bible and try to show that God is good and that it's not true that God ever did teach anything wrong. It does make sense to me that slavery was part of the culture back then, part of the society, part of economics, and so to change it right away might have been because some slaves were white-collar slaves, and people actually sold themselves into slavery and had a better position when they were slaves. So it was just a different kind of a situation in some cases. But again, there's other things that can help us to understand these things and to realize that it's not true that God had laws that were somehow unjust or unfair or bad. The laws of God in the Bible, we believe, are good laws. And one of the explanations Father Michael gave was that unclean, the word, doesn't mean something bad. It just meant that you can't come into the temple, sanctuary, tabernacle, holy place, if you have some sort of bodily secretion or some sort of and because those things are related to life and to death, and those are important things, and maybe they need to be they're not spiritual things. And for example, if someone had sexual relations, they had to wait some time before entering the sanctuary and tabernacle. So that doesn't mean that sex is bad, but it just means that the holy place is a place for spiritual things, not for physical bodily things, and these are major bodily things regarding life and death, and And again, as I think I mentioned, the word unclean, we think that it sounds like it means that it's bad, but this is ancient terminology, and sometimes we have to realize that there's a different logic back then, and again, one of those examples I gave, and I like to say, is this very interesting, that some sacred writings of the Old Testament scrolls were considered to be holy and inspired, and others were not. And the Israelites had a way of saying it, that the books of the Bible that were sacred, they used to say those are the writings that soil the hands. They had that phrase, and it's kind of counterintuitive to us. It's so holy that it soils your hands, and so just goes to show you that the ancient wording sometimes is something that's hard for us to understand, but it's because it's a different kind of a situation back then. Another example of laws that seem to some people to be, ungodlike. For example, in verses 12 through 17 of Exodus chapter 21, you got, God commanding the death penalty, that there are certain things that a person should be stoned or put to death. And they are, to understand that, perhaps you kind of realize that, back then they didn't have, high security prisons. They couldn't protect society from such people. So it's kind of like a situation of, martial law or warfare. If there's, you can't allow certain dangerous people to risk, in society. And so they had certain things that were considered to be so offensive and so bad that they deserved the death penalty. And the examples that we have here are some of them were premeditated murder, if someone, planned to kill someone on purpose, and then assaulting or cursing one's parents, and kidnapping. So those are the things that are mentioned. And those are things that really, if you tolerate those things, your society will certainly unravel very quickly. So yeah, they needed to defend the authority of parents and the right to life, and or to defend the innocent life. And so just like in modern times, the church has sometimes allowed capital punishment, but it's now said in the modern world that usually you can protect society from these people, and it should be very rare that we would have to resort to the death penalty.